Right. Can you guys see me?
Hello there.
Yes, I can.
All right. That was a little interesting to get started there. Had a little logged in under the wrong pretext, I guess.
Let me
Well,
see.
that doesn't work.
No, I'm under a different, whole different set of circumstances.
Miss Kim Baker,
Hi, Cam.
can you
That
hear me,
worked.
Greg? Greg, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can't see me though.
I can't see you. I see Steve, Kim, and I guess that's it for right now.
There it is.
Oh yeah, I see you, John.
Okay, and Kim, you did a super job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, really super. I was really impressed. So I just want to say thank you for all your follow-up.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And Bill, I wonder where Bill is, Mr. Bill.
Good question.
I'll send him a text.
We're still a bit early, aren't we?
Oh yeah, we're 10 minutes early, so we're okay. But
Yeah. So I just texted Bill. So Steve, you know Bill, right?
I do.
Yeah. Are you in his? Were you in his group where they did all the work where they did at the Metropolitan Club? The events.
In and out. In and out. I went on occasion.
Yeah. Well, there's not many of those happening anymore, huh?
No.
Yeah.
Soon. We'll be back doing them soon.
Yeah. Right. That's how the Japanese always answer me. When is it going to be delivered? Soon. That's their answer. It's a funny answer. So Mason, are you?
you guys see me? I've lost you. Can you see me? I can hear you, but
No, I can't see you.
I know I can hear you, but I can't see you now. It went black. I don't know what's going on there.
Put the
Mason,
video.
I can see you.
Hit the video, or Kim maybe help you, but I think I hit the video thing to get my face on the screen.
I
It
can
says
see
no
Mason.
service. There's no service. How could that be?
Bill,
There, everyone's back.
There you go.
All right,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Normally, these are pretty straightforward. I don't know why. I'm having some
Yeah.
difficulty today.
Hey, Greg, are all your forum meetings now, are they all on Zoom or are they some live or what's the deal?
No, in fact, we've switched over almost, well, I think we're restricted up to 10 or less we're doing live. More than 10 we're doing Zoom.
Yeah.
Mostly it's because the locations can't handle larger meetings yet. So
Yeah.
we're doing, like I said, up to 10 in person.
You still do the once a month at the country club?
Well, that's one of them that can't handle a larger group.
Yeah.
So if we have 20 or 25, they can't do
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
So yeah, we do the other, face to face now, but
Yeah.
which everyone loves because there for a long time, not a long time, but for I don't know several weeks, we obviously couldn't meet because the whole world came to a kind of a standstill trying to figure out how to deal with all this COVID stuff.
Yeah.
And so we were doing a lot of conference calls and then some, Zoom calls. Coincidentally, most of the members preferred conference calls to Zoom, which I thought was kind of interesting. I guess conference calls are a lot easier. You don't have to
Yeah.
worry about other factors. And
Yeah.
so
The technology is a little
technology,
easier.
right?
Yeah. There he
I see
is.
Bill just joined.
Wild Bill. Bill, also called Speedy.
you're right.
I went to a
You're
meeting.
going.
I went to a
I like
meeting once with Bill, with
I
meeting
like.
once with Bill, with Maury. Some of you guys know Maury Himmelstein. It was at a luncheon, and there was about 15 of us. Real nice luncheon. And by the time we got home, there were notes in all our mailboxes from Speedy. And I called Bill Himmelstein and said Speedy because he gave us a summary of what everybody said. Like by the time we got home.
I got quick typing fingers. I'm ready.
Yeah, right. So if you need a meeting note taker, Billy's your man.
I was sad to see that Ann
Ann
Evans had to drop out. That's too bad.
Yeah, and Chris Cool is going to be a little late, but he'll be here. And everybody else is Kim. Everybody else is said they'll be here, right?
Yes, so far I'm keeping an eye on my email to be sure everybody has their link, but so far it looks good.
Yeah, so we got Mace.
Thank you for all of your support, Kim. It's been invaluable. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, sure. No problem.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, likewise.
You can use us as your testimonial when you're negotiating with Greg.
You hear that, Greg?
Yeah.
No, my audio went dead. I don't know what happened there.
Use the deaf ear approach there. That was funny. So
You know, what's nice for Kim is that we have a lot of these meetings and she talks to a lot of the members on the phone, of course, but never gets a chance to see them.
Yeah.
And so now with Zoom, now she's able to see them and, meet them, on video at least.
It looks like we've got Tom Selleck has joined us. Steve Brown's got this new facial hair. You look like Tom Selleck, man. That is awesome. Guy gets younger every time I see him.
Mason,
My
what
wife
kind
says
of-
I look more like Santa Claus.
Yeah.
So I prefer Tom Selleck.
You go back to her with that. Tell her I said you look like Tom Selleck. That'll change the narrative.
Mason, what kind of business are you
I'm
in?
afraid in the wrong direction though, Bill.
I'm a corporate attorney. I've known Bill for a while from a different group, the Small Business Advocacy Council, and I've been to a few of his Chicago Cut events. So what do you call it, like long time listener, first time caller or something?
Yeah. It sounds like a talk show host. That's what they say.
Yeah. You hear that on the radio a lot.
Right.
Speaking of Tom Selleck, Steve, I don't know if you knew, or Bill, if you guys knew, but Tom Selleck was a really good volleyball player when he was in college and younger.
Really?
Yeah.
How's his tennis game looking? Do we know about that?
I don't know. Probably pretty good because I think he grew up in Southern Cal, so
He's got to be good. He's got to be good at tennis.
yeah. But if you're good in volleyball, pretty much you're gonna play tennis too. And in Southern Cal, even if you're okay, you're pretty good in California generally.
Right.
He's getting a tad up there in his years. I'm not sure he's playing much volleyball or tennis
Yeah.
these days.
I think you're probably right. I said younger, so volleyball is pretty much a younger person's game.
Mason, what kind of law do you practice?
So I have a corporate firm. We have about 100 companies, mostly 15 to 25 employees in the manufacturing, tech, and healthcare arena. And then we represent some larger nursing homes, kind of doing all their litigation, in-house counsel, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I see. Okay, good.
We're still around, which is good. And so are the nursing homes, which is good.
Right. Mr. Paul, you're looking good. You've been working out?
You're on mute, Paul.
Sorry about that. I don't know about working out, but staying pretty active, sailing every weekend, so that's all good.
For those that don't know Paul, Paul is one of my golfing partners and is always in competition for the worst client golfer of the year. And he once hit a ball about 300 yards over the house, over the thing, and two guys were having a beer, like sitting at the 19, like next to the bar, and he hit one of them. And the guy was kind enough to bring the ball out to the 18th fairway. So long ball Paul, we call him long ball Paul, but be careful when you play golf with him. Yeah, it's a true story. Right, Paul?
That's funny.
It was funny. Yeah. Jonathan's here.
Good morning.
I see Todd's
Good
here.
morning.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Not yet. Yeah. Yeah. So we're missing Brian, Eric, Kevin. Chris Cool will be late. And Scott Nicholson.
We're still a little bit early. I'm in my
1
home,
minute.
and I have a whole crew, a large crew of roofers redoing my roof. So can you guys hear pounding?
No. I
Just
thought you
in
were
my
gonna
head.
say-
That's
I thought that's your backup plan. And if you need any roofing, call Greg, but that's not what you're saying, huh?
No, it's a huge project, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it unless you really need a new roof. Our roof isn't that old; it's about 14 years old, but we had hail damage, and all of a sudden we started getting some leaks. And I have a shake roof, and it's not supposed to leak for like 20 years supposedly.
Yeah.
So I was talking to my neighbors. We live on a cul-de-sac and there's 3 homes, and the other 2 of my neighbors, they had their roofs replaced. And I said, so what happened to your roof? And they both said hail damage. I go, oh my gosh. Since we're on the same street, I figured we must have the same weather.
Right.
So I called the roofing company, and sure enough, they said, yeah, you've got hail damage. And I go,
Yeah.
who knew?
Yeah.
So fortunately, it's the insurance does cover that, but it's a big project.
nice.
Bill and Greg, since you're the host, why don't you just share a little bit with the group that's here before and we'll give a couple more minutes before we start, and share a little bit about how this came about. And Bill and I have done this before, so why don't you give the people who haven't experienced this before a little bit of background?
Well, for me, this is the first time I've done this. John, I know John and Bill have been doing these kinds of meetings for some time, and they've been telling me about it. And I guess they really both suggested that I give it a try. And so I said, well, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Let's see what it's all about. And hopefully we can have a lively discussion about all things related to culture and leadership.
Yeah. For those that don't know you, Greg, tell them a little bit about just a 1 minute overview of what you do about the President's Forum.
The President's Forum is an organization that I run, and we've been in business since 1964. And our mission in life is to find, develop, and share better management methods. So we come at it from the management perspective, and we operate on 3 levels primarily. One is what we refer to as our forum, where we'll have, well, I think our last meeting, we had 22 CEOs sitting around. Well, we used to sit around a large conference style table, and we would discuss, not anymore, now we do Zoom. Although last month we did a tour down in the city, a very interesting place called M Hub. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them, but they provide a lot of resources for early stage and startup corporations. Todd, I imagine you probably know about them.
Yeah, I've actually been there before. Yeah, it's an impressive sort of incubator that really opens the doors for, individuals who want to start a business, but really don't have the means to do it, to give them a space and give them support. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah,
And it's more industrial based, right?
It's a manufacturing. M stands for manufacturing. So they want to make it a manufacturing hub where they help companies get started, and they've developed over 400 patents there. They're one of the big resources that they have is access to 600 engineers, and you can access them in all sorts of ways for various projects, and you own the IP. So it's really interesting, very economical, and really quite powerful. They can also assist in with strategic planning, business planning. They have graphic artists or graphic design people on staff, as well as two engineers and a lot of manufacturing engineering and so forth. A lot of capabilities, equipment and so forth. Anyway, that's
Hold on, someone's got something going on in the background. I don't know if you can mute your screen so we can hear that,
Yeah,
like a TV or radio or something on. There we go.
yeah.
Thank you.
So thanks, Greg. Bill, tell us a little bit, and then we'll get going here.
Well, Greg, were you done? I didn't mean to cut you off there, Greg.
Yeah.
Were you finished?
yeah. So like I said, we operate in 3 levels. The forum is that was the tour we just had, but we'll talk about various subjects off an agenda I put together based on my interactions with the members out in the field. So whatever is of interest to people running what I would define as middle market sized companies is what I try to work on to the agenda. Second level that we operate on is what we call our President's Advisory Councils. This functions like a rotating board of directors for each other, where I'll bring together half a dozen other active CEOs, and we will do a deep dive on a company. We'll tour their facility. We'll interview their entire management team eventually, and we'll comb the financials and really do a deep dive and focus on whatever problem or opportunity, really any decision that's on the CEO's desk, from mergers and acquisitions to hiring and firing to compensation to safety to productivity to COVID to management succession and estate planning. You name it, we've probably discussed it. Paul has a little experience with us. He's been involved in our third level,
Yeah.
which is what we call our executive program, and that's composed of executive advisory councils, which is designed for the second level of management, let's say the VP level. And there I'll bring together CFOs or sales managers or operations managers. And Paul was active with us in our CFO group.
So Bill, why don't you do a brief intro yourself? I think most people know you here, and then a little bit about the power culture during COVID-19, what we've done and what we're going to do today.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that, John. And I'm really honored to be able to host this along with Greg. And John and I have done several of these different types of educational seminars. My business is based around real estate. We're commercial real estate brokers. We work with businesses to help them find the right space that's going to support them in attracting and retaining top talent. And it's going to support them in growing their culture and solidifying their culture, supporting their culture. A lot of the events that I've done with John have been surrounding culture. And what we're realizing is that in the past, culture has always been about being front and center, all being together and talking about, you know, your values and, you know, what your goals are, what you're working towards. And now that we're in a situation where most people aren't coming into the office right now, culture is still very important, and we still need it to attract and retain top talent. We still need that to be as the driving force behind who we are as a business and where we're going to be going in the future. And so we thought it was really important to have a dialogue with other business owners about, you know, what does culture look like with the remote workforce, and how can we move towards bringing that culture front and center so we can continue to grow our business, so we can continue to attract and retain top talent. And then we can continue to have those ancillary support, like your space, to continue to support that culture that you want to bring going forward.
So, welcome, the power of culture during COVID-19. This is for those who haven't been to one before. These are interactive conversations. They're not presentations, they're interactive dialogues. And the 3 questions is, what exactly is culture? Why bother with it? And how can I create a unique, empowering culture for myself? You might think about yourself, your team, or your company, especially during COVID-19 time. So my name is John Rue, and I'm here for you today. I'm a facilitator, interviewer that will facilitate this conversation. And this is a subject near and dear to my heart because it's our core competency. So what I want to do is, in a moment, let each of you talk briefly about your name, your company, your role, the key expectation you want to get out of this time together, and the key challenge you face in reference to culture. And then we'll discuss the 3 questions. What is culture? What you want to come away with, this is starting the process of defining your culture. Okay, what is culture to you? That's the first question. Second question is, why bother with it? We all got lots of things we got to do. So you might be saying, and you may be going to your partners and saying, well, you know, hey, we got to make sales, or we got to do, I mean, why are we talking about this? So why? You got to get the why clear. And then the third question is how you do it. Okay, but if you don't know the what and the why, the how-to is not going to make a lot of sense. So we'll discuss that. And then at the end, on the form that was sent to you, we'll ask you for your takeaways, a question around, you know, what is, given who you are as a leader, what is your next move have to be? And that will be the dialogue today. So that's kind of the agenda. All righty?
John, I have a thought on that. Maybe
Yeah.
as some comments, just as a maybe an overall point of view from my perspective. And you mentioned leader, and I think very much leadership is key to culture. And I think a leader can and should delegate as much as they can. However, 2 things a leader cannot delegate, in my view, are the vision for the organization and the culture. These must come from the top. And people want to hear what is expected from them, from their leader. And
So
my
Greg,
view
so
is
Greg,
that,
when we get to why bother with it, that's what I want you to zero in. And this is because now, and why this is important when Greg speaks about this, Greg has, he won't tell you this, but Greg has done over 1,000 peer groups, thousands of them, with all kinds of businesses. So, I mean, that's somebody that just started thinking about this yesterday. So let's start with
actually
Steve.
I've had over 2,200 council meetings
Yeah.
over my
So-
career, so which are like board meetings. Yes.
So let's start with Steve. Steve, why don't you talk about yourself, give us your name, your company, your role, what your expectation is for today, and your key challenge.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I'll try and remember 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah.
So Steve Brown, the president and CEO of Stratego Partners. We are a cost-saving management consulting firm geared to strategy and execution of cost-saving recommendations and the implementation of them. Our focus is on companies and clients that we call mid-market, and mid-market to us is 100 to 200 million in revenue, up to 2 to 3 billion in revenue. We're industry agnostic, we're vendor, supplier, service provider agnostic, and in fact, on the vendor, supplier, service provider side, we actually try to keep the incumbent relationship in place. There's a few good reasons for that. One is, number one, there's no disruption if you don't change out any of those relationships. And number 2, it's usually faster and easier and more efficient to make changes and renegotiate existing deals than negotiate new deals and all of the due diligence that goes into looking at a new vendor, supplier, service provider. And these are all large outside spend categories, so they're important business relationships to our clients. And at the end of the day, if you keep the incumbent in place, sort of everybody wins. The incumbent keeps a piece of business, the client keeps a relationship in place, and it's faster and more efficient. And if you're getting great service support and quality from your existing relationships, then you definitely want to keep those in place.
What would you like to get out of the conversation today with this group?
So with this group, culture is, and I agree with what Greg had said earlier, culture, I think, and leadership are 1 and 1A for every company that's out there. And they don't, you can't have sort of one without the other. I guess you can have, with bad leadership, you can have bad culture, but it's literally impossible to have good culture with bad leadership. So I think that's something I want to get out of this. And I would challenge any client or any CEO who's out there to answer the following question. Tell me your top performers in your organization that come to work every day looking to be managed as opposed to be looking to be led and inspired. So that's kind of
Great.
where I'm coming from, and hope the dialogue's really good. Thanks.
Mason,
Thanks, John.
your name, your role, what would you like to get out? What would you like to discuss today?
Sure. Mason Cole. I have a firm called Cole Sadkins. So there's 7 of us acting as in-house counsel for a variety of, I don't know, mid-sized companies. I've definitely noticed that, we've gone remote. Most of our clients have gone remote. And I think that on the one hand, I kind of like the flexibility that it gives, but in my world, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of bouncing of ideas. I'd call that culture, and we're really losing that. And I think with some of my clients, instead of being able to sit down in a room and really work together on things, they're losing that as well, because you're not going to call up a staff member just to have a 30-second joke that I think sometimes leads to some progress. So I'm interested to see, especially as we're dealing with everybody being remote, possibly semi-permanently, how do we kind of keep that team aspect? So
Great. So losing our culture, especially during remote times due to COVID, is that accurate?
Yeah.
Mr. Paul, and Paul's done a lot of work. Paul, what would you tell people about yourself, and what would you like to discuss today, Paul?
Sure. First things first, shout out to Greg in the President's Forum. If none of you have ever sat through one of his forums, it is unbelievably educational for a business owner to get, I think, straight, no emotional advice from fellow business owners, and it really resonates with them because it's coming from a peer and not necessarily from an underling or somebody on their staff. And they can have a tremendous impact on an organization and really help leadership. Anyway.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, well deserved.
Send them a check, Greg. Okay, Paul, what do you want to discuss?
So
Send them some golf balls.
I am a fractional CFO. I work with companies anywhere from 10 million to 100 million. And I really help them break down their financials, understand why or why not their accounting finance systems may or may not be working, and really help them translate the numbers into action. What I'm hoping to get out of today's meeting is, I know it's easy to spot good culture when it works really well. What do you do when you have a bad culture, and how do you influence and how do you change it? And I find culture one of those things that are so hard to define. And it, for an analytical guy like me, it's very difficult to analyze why something would be working and what doesn't work. I can see the impact that leadership has in changing the culture of an organization. I just had a client that, had a well-entrenched leadership that all got fired or asked to leave, and brought in new leadership, and it's produced 30% growth in the biggest downturn in our economy. So culture does matter.
Chris Kula, talk about yourself, your role, and what you want to get out of this conversation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris. I run a specialty distribution company that works with sewing in the sewing industry, working with a lot of independent shops. I'm more interested just to kind of listen and hear what everybody else has to say. This whole pandemic thing has been very, very interesting kind of as we navigate it. And it's been great for business, but I think it's been hard on the employees. Having people in and people out, and people needing to work from home, whereas other people were asking to come to the office. So just to kind of keep everybody together when we're not necessarily all together in the office. It's been an interesting thing to navigate, and we've held up and our sales numbers look good, but I think the attitude of the people can be a challenge sometimes. And how do we continue to get through it and continue to keep everybody's eyes on the prize in the same way during all this crazy time? So I'd be interested to hear what everybody else kind of thinks about that and what they have to say.
So I just want to highlight that this is an issue that's come up tremendously with many companies around COVID-19 and the stress issue. So it's just, you didn't use that word, but I'm just going to plug that word in. Eric, your role and your company and what would you like to get out of today's conversation?
Well, I'm the immediate past CEO of an organization called Forefront, which is the State Association for Nonprofits, Foundations, and B Corps and social entrepreneurs. I've spent 6 years in that role, spent 18 years as the CEO of an organization called CARA, which is a nonprofit that helps individuals who are homeless, helping them to get jobs and keep jobs. And I am in the midst of transitioning to a new CEO role, and I'm interviewing with a number of for-profit and nonprofit companies over the next few months. I would like to reiterate everything that's been said today, particularly building a vibrant culture, a cohesive team in the midst of this pandemic. How do we navigate that?
Great, that's very clear. Thank you. Jonathan.
You're on mute, Jonathan.
Okay.
There you go.
My name's Jonathan Weiss. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for about 25 years. I'm the co-managing partner of a firm in Chicago, Levin Ginsberg. In terms of my expectation or hopes for today, I know we're talking about culture, but I'd like to know more about what is culture. It's a term that we've thrown around, that people throw around all the time, but really, what is it? How do you define what it is?
Right.
And how do you create it or change it? And in our firm, we say we have a good culture. People are friendly, family oriented, etc.
Right.
But I also have noticed that, of the 20 or more people that we have in our office, everyone sort of has different viewpoints on what our culture is. So how do we create a culture that's viewed consistently from person to person, as opposed to everyone having a different idea as to what our culture is?
So it's very, very relevant. It's a great question. Everybody can live in that question. We'll be discussing it. But if I said, here's a pen, well, everybody knows what a pen is or a glass of water. But if you asked, and I've done this, if you ask 20 people in a room what culture, you get 20 different answers. So that's why one of the issues is defining your culture. So we'll talk about that and we'll start on that. And we're going to be talking one-on-one anyway, so we can add on to that. Kevin, good morning. What would you introduce yourself and what would you like to discuss?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. Kevin McFall, Chief Operating Officer of a nonprofit organization called the Inner City Computer Stars Foundation, IC Stars for short. We find talent in unusual places. We train them and we put the individuals to work. So in short, it's a workforce development and leadership building organization. We're primarily centered on building IT business leaders. And I've been there for 2.5 years on staff and volunteered off and on for the past 18 years. I want to thank Bill Himmelstein for extending an invitation to join you all this morning. Thank you, Bill. And I have a interesting paradigm in that we had identified issues within our culture and had begun addressing those issues prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, our program delivery went virtual, and new issues arose, particularly a concern of our culture right now is that of attrition. We're identifying that there are issues of morale not necessarily attributable to our culture, but to the climate And combined with, you know, the move to a virtual operation, we're seeing that combination of circumstances sort of fuel a level of attrition within the organization. And of course, now our shift is to try to figure out how to foster a culture of retention and positive morale, given, you know, all that is going on.
Great. Kim, Kim is our technical expert. Kim, is there anything you want to say or anything before I go on to Todd?
Oh, there we go. Hi. No, I guess I don't have anything to add at this point. I'll just be listening in, and if anyone has any trouble, they can go ahead and send me an email if you get kicked off or something happens. But I'm here to help, and I'll just be sitting here listening.
Todd, what would you like to discuss?
Well, I'll just give a brief introduction because a lot of people I don't know. Todd Stukenberg. I spent the last 25 years in a variety of privately held businesses, majority of that time with a business that was very actively involved in the President's Forum and also very much a culture-oriented business. And I don't think that those two things are happenstance. I think that there's a definite linkage there. So very interested in culture, have background in organizational development. And I guess for today, wanting to hear and also have conversations about how culture today, in my opinion, is more important than ever before because of the fact that people are distanced and there aren't some of the constructs that we've all gotten used to in the past there to kind of help guide and continue to support the culture. So thanks.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say about Todd, because I want you to listen to what Todd says. Todd, I worked with Todd for many years at his company. They went from nothing to create a very empowering culture. And we're listed, I think, one of the top companies to work in Chicagoland. And he also asked Greg, he used to speak at Greg's President's Forum once on culture. So it's got implementation ideas, not just concepts, implementation. So let's start. I'm going to ask you, Bill. So what is culture? I mean, we might get 9 different answers here, and there's no right or, I want you to kind of live in the question. The question will create the answer. The right question. So Bill, what's culture to you? You got a successful company. You've been very successful. You tell me you got a nice, empowering culture. What's culture to you?
To me, culture is the personality of an organization. It's the values they support, and it's, the type of people that we are trying to be. And what we do at Tenant Advisory Group is we have a couple of values that we talk to anyone coming into our firm about and say, this is who we are. We get back to our clients right away. We are honest. We do what we say we're going to do. We follow through. And so to me, that produces a culture of accountability. It produces a culture of being able to trust others to do their work. But what the simplest I define it is, it's the personality of an organization. It's who they are and the values that they uphold and project.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the function of values in a minute, but that's very clear. You can see how that's a basis of how he goes about. We all have to find, focus, and support people. Everyone in this room is geared, their questions are, how are we going to find people, focus, support? Now, it may have changed because of the virus, but that's a values-based approach to interviewing. What about you, Christopher? What's culture to you?
I think what everybody else said kind of really sums it up. I mean, it's true. It's not just who do we want to be, it's how are we going about our business every single day. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the most important part. It's very easy to put something on paper and say what we want to be, but are we actually walking the walk?
Right. Okay. Well, and that deals with the why point. At the why point, I mean, why you have to do this is, if you have words, if they're merely words on a piece of paper, a lot of people say, but we don't act it out. I mean, what usefulness of it is. What about you, Jonathan? Anything else? What's the answer to the question for you? And you all have your own answer. Write it down for yourself. What exactly is culture? Get it clear in writing, and I'll tell you how we approach it. But there's I want you to kind of think this through a little more.
You're on mute, Jonathan.
Culture is a shared set of values that everyone ascribes to and commits to. So we try to have a culture of accountability, similar to what Bill was saying. But that's sort of how I view it. And the one area where we have trouble from time to time is when people fall off the wagon, and even though everyone says they're committed to what our values are, because they're pretty straightforward things: do what you say you're going to do, be responsive, etc.
Yeah.
Not everyone is as good as at those things as others. So,
Right.
How do we get people to really follow through? But that's what I think.
Right. That's great, Paul. Anything you want to say? You can see these are two people that said they have their values defined and shared, and you're using them in, I'm assuming, finding, focus, supporting people. So this is very powerful. This is one of the elements of culture. So two people have here said that, and it's very practical. And Jonathan and Bill are both pragmatists, so this is now you can use this all the time. Paul, what about you? You brought up, especially, there's no analytics on this.
Tell me
There's
about
no
it.
analytics, Paul. What's the ROI on this? You're
Yeah,
a financial guy. What's our ROI?
Yeah,
I mean,
you
why
tell me how to measure
are we
the.
bothering Paul with something we don't have an ROI on? I mean, come on.
John, when you figure out the ROI formula, let me know, because then it's a very easy sell. But one thing that I would add to a couple of the comments is, just because you have accountability, I think sometimes we take accountability as an enforcement, and you will do things this way. But, to me, I think in today's world, accountability, really means, let's be fair about it. And if you're not, if you communicate
Yeah, so the
the standards of
the
the
COVID
organization, and
environment.
you're not playing by those rules, well, you need to hold people accountable.
Yeah. So the COVID
You
environment.
know, I
Go
think, Paul, you almost touched on something that I think gets to the nub of it. And that is, people have expressed that their cultures are okay, and I agree with everyone said, about the personality of the firm and the accountability and so forth. So when you're not happy with your culture, that's where this becomes more important. And you've heard vestiges of this from people saying, okay, well, now we're working remotely, it's harder to get the team together, and we're losing some of that value sensitive. So again, let me back up a step. I think that this comes down to leadership, and when the leader gets better, everybody benefits. And if you, as the leader, do not like your culture or the vision for your firm, especially under COVID, then your organization or your team or your family, then you must change it. And I believe everyone is a leader. You influence people often, and this is, I think, the definition of a leader, and is the ability to influence people. So when you start talking about an ROI, like Paul was mentioning, I think the issue, people only change for two reasons, I think. And John, you might have a little different perspective on this, but I think one is desperation, which could be translated into fear, or the other is inspiration. And right now, we had a lot of fear or desperation with COVID. The whole world changed. I think of all the companies I've worked with, which is many, not one company had planned for a pandemic. So I'm going to say this impacted every company or organization out there, and no one planned for it. So there was a lot of fear. People were fearful that they were going to get sick. They were fearful that they're going to lose their job. People were fearful that their company wasn't going to exist any longer, and so forth and so on. So you had a lot of fear out there. And when there's fear or uncertainty, I think people are much more willing to change because they get desperate. And so that's where the ROI comes in, Paul, I think, is that you have the ability to affect change when people are fearful of their jobs or their future existence, and therefore they're willing to do things they might not otherwise be willing to do.
Todd, what would you say? What would
John,
you
can I hop in?
hop in, Steve?
This has been really interesting and some good questions so far. I'd like to hit the ROI thing because that's my business. But quite frankly, there are things that happen in life and in business that don't have anything to do with ROI. You do it because it's the right thing to do and you believe in it. And I think that gets to Greg, what, the inspirational side of things. Right. So culture is stop thinking about ROI, do it because you believe that a better culture will deliver a better performing organization, and you do it because that's what you believe in. There's a lot of companies, most successful companies of today, when they were first starting out, they weren't doing ROI. Apple wasn't doing ROI. Amazon certainly wasn't doing ROI. They were coming up with a strategy, executing it tremendously. And everybody that worked at those companies early on worked there because they believed in the leadership. They were inspired by the leader. They were all in. And then it's the leader's job to figure out, well, how do we make this happen? And how do I get everybody coming to work every day, acting and interacting with each other in the most optimal way to deliver the strategy? And you can, there's too much that goes into financial analysis and it gets to paralysis and you end up not getting the right things done and the focus on the right things because you lose sight of here's what we're going to do because I believe this. And then along the way, the answer to the ROI is you're going to have a better performing company. If you don't have a better performing company and it's because people aren't doing what they say they're going to do and they're not acting the way they should with each other, then it's going to, that's where the culture piece falls apart and leadership has to come in and step in.
Thanks for your insight.
Steve, I think you're absolutely right, Steve. I spoke to the fear piece, but the inspiration piece is, I suppose many of you are familiar with Steve Jobs when he was interviewing John Scully. And he said, Scully basically said, why should I come to work for Apple? And Steve Jobs said, well, do you want to change the world or do you want to sell sugared water? And when he said that to Scully, Scully realized, okay, the purpose is totally different. I buy into that inspiration. And of course, Scully, moved over to Apple. So those are the things that can inspire. That vision is so strong that it inspires people to come to work, to be accountable, to do the things necessary to execute on that strategy. I believe you have to, we as leaders have to obsess over the why. Why do we do this?
Well, let's Greg, let me get Todd. We want to help people get the definition of what is culture to you for today, and then talk the why, because you're moving into why, which is the next question, and then we'll move into the how to. So at least, we're not going to dig into this deeply, but you'll get a framework, the what, the why, and the how, and you'll be able to work with this. Todd, what would you define? And I want you to listen to what Todd says. What's culture to you, Todd?
So this is going to sound like a textbook answer, but I assure you it didn't come out of a textbook. Culture is the invisible hand that guides the actions, actions, and attitudes within a group of people. So it doesn't matter if it's a business, a sports team, or whatever. The culture is something that's obviously, as we've discussed, non-tangible, but it's acting at all times. And it can be acting in a positive way. It can be acting in a negative way. It can be acting in a fearful way. It can be acting in an aggressive way, but it's there acting all the time. And it truly is derived from a variety of things that I'm sure we're going to talk about, some of the core constructs, not the least of which is not is the leadership, and leadership is it can mean a lot of different things as it impacts culture.
So for today, there's two things that you people mentioned. For today, think of culture. If you need a model for this, think of culture. Greg mentioned vision, Bill mentioned values, and Jonathan mentioned value. Think of four things: your vision, goals, mission, and value. So when you're finding people or focusing or supporting, are they clear about where you're going? And the goals may be on an annual or short. A lot of people, inspirational people, will look at the long term. Meat and potato people, people need some more tangible goals. Mission is why you're doing what you're doing, and values is the code of conduct. So think of vision for this conversation today. Just for today, think of this: defining our culture and vision, goals, mission, and values. And let's move then into the why. Why bother with this? Eric, why, we got other things to do. Why bother with this?
Because as the expression, culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah.
And I love the comments about the fact that culture is the personality, culture is the invisible hand. It's this, I look at it as a pool of water that you're swimming in whenever you're part of a group, an organization. And so the why is that if you do not have a vibrant culture, if you do not have a cohesive team, if you don't have values that are contributing to the vision, goals, and the mission, then you're really at a disadvantage. It's critically important.
Yeah.
Can I challenge that for a second?
Hold on for a second, Steve. Let's see what Kevin has to say. And by the way, let's not negate what anybody says here. Let's just take it in, and you might think of it differently. But Kevin, why, from your standpoint, why bother with culture?
I think the rationale for caring about the culture of the organization and how healthy that culture is has a lot to do with again, whether or not you are aligned with your mission. Because if you're building a culture and it's contrary to the behaviors or actions are contrary to what your mission and your values are and the vision is, you're going to take the company in the wrong direction. The organization will surely fail or experience such things as bad morale or other consequences. And so it's very important to care and to seek the alignment of that culture to mission.
Anybody else? Mason, anything else you want to say about this, or why bother with it? You got to get in your gut. And I know, like Greg has talked about this and what have you. What is the why behind this? And so you understand why you're going to need to spend the time and the money, because this is a complicated subject. This takes hard thinking. This isn't something you just go to a meeting and all of a sudden create. It's going to take a process and some hard thinking. Mason, any of the whys?
I don't know if I can think of something unique to bring to the table. It would be, if everyone's getting paid the same and if everyone's doing the same work, I'm thinking of my industry of an attorney, why would my employees stay here instead of going somewhere else?
Right.
So hopefully if you build that, you kind of get a little bit more loyalty there.
From a practical standpoint, that's one of my answers. In order to find people, focus, and retain them, you want to have an empowering culture, which Bill creates spaces that are empowering. Greg just talked about leadership establishing it. So for me, you need to define your game. The culture is translated into a game plan. Now, anybody that didn't see the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan thing? Remember what Phil Jackson, by the way, I sent him a book once, and we had an event featuring Randy Brown, who worked for Phil, played for Phil for 3 years. What did you notice in The Last Dance how they started The Last Dance with? Remember what Phil had on The Last Dance?
He had a theme.
Yeah, and he had a game plan. So you put your culture, and we'll talk about the how to. You need to put this culture into a game plan. So when you're hiring people, it's not just things, abstracts, or just little pieces of paper all over the place. It becomes very practical. Steve, you wanted to say something else about the why.
Yeah, I've often heard the culture eats leadership for lunch, and I
No,
don't
strategy,
think that
strategy, not leadership.
strategy. I'm not sure that it does. I think they're two very separate things that are happening that have to come together and congeal in an organization. And if you if you have great culture, but you don't have good strategy, I'm not sure that that works. And if you have great strategy and bad culture, I don't think that works.
Yeah.
So it's really hard.
It's a hand in the glove for you. It's a hand in the glove.
It's kind of that 1 and 1A combination.
Right,
it's
right.
not an either or. You can't be successful without all of that stuff going on. And so I just wanted to say that. The other big question in my mind for the group is, I think it's with COVID going on right now, and I'm hearing this from a lot of clients, it's much easier to go remote with the people who've been around for a while because they already have a sense of team and they already have a sense of culture. But when you've got organizations like large accounting firms or large companies that are bringing in hundreds, maybe of thousands of new people every year, and they're getting onboarded in this situation, how do you make that happen? How do you develop that sense of team for the people who haven't had the sense of team yet? Because I think that's the big challenge for certainly larger companies today. It's a big challenge for HR, and it's also a big challenge for companies that are growing rapidly, like your technology companies. When you've got a technology company that's 50 people, and in 6 months they're 125 people, they just brought on more than 100% of what their existing employee base was, and those people have no clue. So that's where culture is going to be really key, but delivering it and implementing it is the big challenge, being remote now as opposed to some of the face-to-face interaction. So that's a big question I have for the group.
Any other questions that people have around why bother with it that you haven't heard that you want to say, hey, here's why I need to, as a leader, like Greg talked about, this is why I have to make this a priority. Anybody else have any of the whys that they haven't heard so far? And then I want to ask Todd what he has to say and see if Bill and Greg have anything else to offer. Todd, why do you bother with it? You spent a lot of time on this and you were masterful at implementation. Why did you bother with it?
Well, because I think foundationally, if you don't have a culture established, then you will have people that in essence are more rogue actors. And that's like a headwind against any strategy that you're trying to act on. And so that's why it needed to be established, and then it needs to be reinforced. You know, one of the top, I would say, one of the top thinkers on culture and one of the better writers on culture in modern times is Patrick Lencioni. And he holds the premise that when you feel like you talked a lot about culture, that's when you've just started to talk about culture. Because it really is something, especially in a time like now when people are not present together, it needs to be reinforced and reinforced ad nauseum, because it is going to influence everything that goes on in your organization.
Jack Welch, who just recently passed, said those exact same words. You know, you may get sick of hearing yourself, but they haven't heard it, so you need to do it over and over. What about you, Bill? Anything else on the whys on this that you want to share with the group? That, you know, why you bother with it that you may want to share with the group?
I mean, I just agree that without a roadmap, you don't know where you're going. I mean, you could end up anywhere. And so to me, the why is having that roadmap to guide you in your actions, behaviors, words, all the things that you do.
What about you, Greg? What would you say? Why? You're in the president's forum. They say, hey, I got to put an IT system. I got to get sales. I got to get product out the door. Why should I bother with this, Greg?
Well, as many have touched on already, to me, it boils down to leadership. And if you have a strong culture, that usually emanates from a strong leader. You heard a little bit of this already, where we've got two law firms here. Law firms are partnerships. And so you've got, I think one group had like 7 or so, and I don't know how many the other had, but if you try to run a company with 7 leaders or 25 leaders, partners who are supposed to be leaders, very, very difficult. When you get into a football game and you got one quarterback, Joe Montana's calling the plays. He is the leader. He is the captain. He creates the culture on the field, which is instantaneously translated into action. In a law firm, I think it's very difficult when you've got multiple people. Somebody said, "How do everyone has their own impression or interpretation of our culture." I'm sure in the huddle with Joe Montana, there was no lack of interpretation. Everyone understood exactly what Joe Montana was going to do in that huddle, or Tom Brady, whoever you want to use as an example. So I think to me, it boils down to leadership. And as you touched on, John, I think you have to obsess as the leader about the why. Why are we doing this? Which always has to come back to our purpose. Why does our firm exist? Like I mentioned before, Apple wanted to change the world. I think in large part they have done an extremely good job of that. And if it wasn't for that vision and then the strategy to make that happen, which takes a certain kind of culture, that would never have happened. And so I think they could have had the best products in the world, but without the other supporting pieces of that, they would not be the world's wealthiest or largest cap company in the world.
So Greg talked about people that work off of inspiration and people that work off of, I don't remember your word, survival or fear. So we did research a lot of this. So if you talk to the opportunity thinkers versus the have-to thinkers, my answer to this would be the number one thing is culture is the foundation of life and the foundation of work. So when you're crystal clear about where you've been, where you're at, where you're going, why you're doing, how you're doing it, it makes decisions very easy. So my architect client, I always tell them, you build a foundation before. If you don't have a good foundation, you can't build a house. So think of it as the foundation of your business or the foundation of your life. Secondly, what we talked about is that you can put it in practical application to find people. Use your culture and your game plan when you're interviewing, because nobody does this and it sets you apart. Very powerful. Then when you focus them, here's why you're on the payroll. Mission is why you're on the payroll. Iwo Jima, they knew what the mission was, take the hill. Mission for a job is why you're on the payroll. And the third aspect is then in this supporting and retention. So it's practical. And the third thing I'd say, it works. I don't know how. If you're hiring people and they're coming from the game of football and Greg, you're playing the game of golf, I'm going to be operating from the rules of football, but that's inappropriate. So, people come from a culture. And so you need to define this because you don't know the culture they're coming from. So it's good to have that. So,
Hey, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you get back to this culture thing and leadership and strategy, because I think they're all kind of rolled into one, the thing that will most hurt and destroy an organization is when the leader isn't unrelenting about the culture piece. The leader cannot allow somebody who is adversely affecting culture to continue working at that company for one more day. And it's the biggest challenge, I think, for leadership is recognizing who your bad culture people are and doing what you're supposed to do as a leader, which is get them out of the organization, tell them to go work somewhere else. In fact, try and get them a job at one of your competitors. And in those ways, you're going to be able to create culture, because if you as the leader allow bad actors, I think somebody mentioned that before, to continue in your organization, it's going to eat away at your culture every day.
I'd like to just comment really quickly on that, and I'm in agreement about the responsiveness to bad actors. But on the opposite side of the court, if you are looking to create a paradigm shift in your culture and you're hiring in new change agents, right, then there's going to be a clash and some resistance, and it's going to create tension in your culture for the short term. But I think it's important to be, steadfast and resilient if, as a leader, your goal is to facilitate change within your culture. Then when you're introducing change agents, you have to be able to support them and create a path to affect that change and the outcome that you desire. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, it just flows into the next question. So, and again, you're going to dig. This isn't like take these questions, talk about for an hour and a half, live in these questions. These questions will help you define this, and it will eliminate a lot of stress. This eliminates a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering by defining this up front. Okay, that's the practical aspect, especially if you're having turnover over and over. So then the third question is how can I create and design a unique, empowering culture? Think of it for yourself. If I were talking to each of you one-on-one, I'd say, tell me about your individual culture, for yourself, your team, your company. So, and that was kind of Steve led into that. So how do you actually create this? And that's a good question for you, Chris. What would be the how-tos for you?
One of the things that I've actually been thinking about a lot is how do I get the input from the lowest level employees? John and I have talked about it before, and I think if I asked everybody what our culture was from my management team, I think they're all on board. It's kind of the grunts at the bottom rung of the ladder. They're the ones that I want to understand it, that might be kind of bogged down in their day to day, and to them it's a 9 to 5 and a paycheck, and they're in and out. But, as we talk about this, the whole point is if we can define that culture, it's how they go about their business for that 9 to 5 aspect for their paycheck.
Right.
That's why I want to make sure that those people are tied into the conversation and make sure it's clear to everybody across the organization. I think that's where my organization is kind of behind right now. So my goal is really to get all of them in a room and start at the bottom and talk up, as opposed to go the other way and expect the managers to talk down to everybody. I think input from the lowest level employee are kind of what helps us define it and help them understand what my vision is. And again, I'm talking to the management team on a daily basis. I don't necessarily talk to our customer service rep that's on the phone all day, all that often. So I think from my perspective, I need to start at the bottom and work up, as opposed to the other way around, as I would handle most other things, to understand what that culture is.
Well, Jonathan,
Chris, I'm not sure you have to pull everybody into a room. You can do that one-on-one. Just stop by their desk on a regular basis and just continue to reiterate the vision for the company, why we do what we do, and the values. And it takes many exposures. It doesn't just happen. You don't just say it one time. Like Lencioni says, when you think you've talked too much about it, it's just getting to the point where it's starting to register.
I agree.
So, Chris, you have the values defined in the firm that whether you're sweeping the floors or you're the president, they're clearly stated?
Well, we have the values defined from our Swiss parent company. And they're great, but they're kind of generic is the best way to put them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my concern is, again, it's great to put it on paper and say, here's what we are. But to make sure everybody understands that and make sure they believe it and think that's really what we're doing, are we walking the walk? And that's why I want to talk to those lower level employees, because they see it on paper, but to them on a day-to-day basis, if their job's to answer the phone, are they living it? Is it real to them?
Right. So in Chris's case, he's working for a company that's over 120 years old, and they pretty much leave him alone if he does it. So that's the parent company, but he's determined his own individual. So here's 3 keys for your culture. It should be truthful. If it's not truthful, it's not going to work. In other words, if you're saying speed's important, you're at Jimmy John's and you don't deliver the stuff for a day, you're probably not going to last long at Jimmy John's. So, you know, speed has a certain meaning at Jimmy John's. So it has to be A, truthful, B, heartfelt. Greg talked about this and Bill touched on a little bit heartfelt. And then it has to be language in the language that works for the receiver. That's the 3rd point. If you don't put it in words they understand or practicality, then those are 3 criteria. When we're doing culture and game plans, those are, you know, and it's already there. You have a culture. It's just discovering it and packaging it and marketing it to new employees, existing employees, because then it makes life a lot easier. Eric, what do you want to say about this?
I really, what this notion of language that really resonates with people. And I think that's really insightful, because my issue often with companies is they have their values highlighted on their website, but that's it. Or the values are not practical. They're not ones that people can relate to. They're not continually affirmed throughout other rituals and other types of practices within the company. So I think the values is really a strong foundation from which to build the culture. But I often find with organizations, they're not living, breathing values, rather they're just posted on a website.
Right. If these are words on a wall and you don't, if I say speed's important and I never give, and I'm slow, or if I say integrity is important and I don't operate with integrity, this is worse.
Right.
If you're the leader, you don't want to preach one thing and then do another. It's a killer. I used to own one of the largest staffing firms, my first business that I started and sold. That's a killer. Makes staffing firms rich. It's a way to make a staffing firm rich is, you know, because whether you have fine china or cheap stuff on a level, on something on a table on an angle, it's going to fall off. So you wanted to find this. Now, Eric, a brilliant person that knew a lot about this was Roger Williams, who founded Providence in 1636, where you had religious liberty. And he lived with the Native Americans. And he said, it's a famous, one of my famous studies, is you have no right to convert anybody to understand their language and their culture. Now, he was talking about in religious, but think of this in your business. You have no right until I understand your culture and I understand your language. So that's the importance of language. You got a language in a way that it's going to resonate with people. Jonathan, anything else you want to say about this?
No, I think, I guess going back to what I said earlier about different people having different perceptions of what our culture is, I don't think that's so much our issue as I think everyone agrees on what our culture is, what our values are. We have it in writing. And the biggest issue is holding everyone accountable for that and making sure and being relentless in terms of making sure that everyone follows through on those values every day. That's the challenge.
So think of the how-to. So how can you support and get people in alignment with these values? You have any how-tos on that, Jonathan? What is it you're doing to support this? Because you have stated values, Bill has stated values, and you must be doing things to say, okay, here's what they mean. So any tips you want to give?
We try to give immediate feedback to people to the extent we can. We went from doing yearly evaluations to doing quarterly evaluations. Those are a couple of things that we've done. But in terms of the leadership of the firm, we're also, busy with our own practices and dealing with our own clients, and then, dealing with the personnel and the culture and being relentless about that is an added layer of work. And it's hard to juggle it all. And sometimes we'll, let things go. And the problem that we've realized is if you let things go, once or twice, all of a sudden people think it's acceptable behavior.
Right,
And-
right. And we talked about that. If people are in violation of basic core values, let's use the word integrity, and you tolerate, the people will know what you tolerate, and you can drive out 8, 9s, and 10s. I have a client that just lost a 9 because they were tolerating 4, 5s, and 6s. And they wouldn't give him what he wanted, but they tolerated that. So that was a conflict for him. Bill, you're really good at this. So what's your how-to tips? We're sharing how-to tips right now, and there's no wrong answer here. What the how-to may work for somebody else here. So any how-to tips of how do you create and implement this empowering culture? Because you've retained people pretty well, and it seems like, what do you do?
Yeah, so I think in regards to my earlier comment, it starts with the roadmap, defining the mission, visions, and values. And then you got to live it. You got to do that. You got to be it. You know, Greg said from the beginning, he's maintained this whole time, it comes from the leadership, you know, and I think Steve made a great comment about how, you know, bad leaders are probably not going to be there to support a great culture. But I think it starts with embodying that culture. As the leader, you need to embody who you want to be, the values you want to support. You know, you've got to be, when I say be responsive, I can't wait 5 days to respond to Greg, you know, when he asks me a question, or if he refers me to a client of his, I can't wait 5 days before I say, oh, Greg, thanks for the introduction. If I, you know, hey, John, I'm going to clock today. I deliver it by 5 o'clock. So I think it starts with the leadership embodying those values and really guiding the ship and being that culture. And that to me is where it starts.
Now, here's a point that this will happen, because this will come up. Some people are thinking, no matter who you are, let's say you value getting back, being responsive. That'd be a good one, Bill, because you're responsive. And like in my company, we got everybody 24 hours. You got to get back same day, within 24 hours, not let them wait forever. Well, there's times where you're going to fall down, and there's still guidelines. I mean, like Robert Pujols, which is just tied Willie Mays, good at bats. You do your best, and you can, as long as you operate with integrity and you clear it up with people and you're honest with them, they'll hold it. I mean, we're all going to make mistakes, but the point of it is, it's our code of conduct. Think of values as code of conduct, and this is how we behave like this. When Greg is putting, I don't yell obscenities at him. I'd like to, because he's slow on the green, but I don't, because that's the game of golf. But when I go to the Bears games, if Paul goes to the Bears games, I can tell you when they're kicking a field goal, he has some of the foulest thing coming out of his mouth. So it's 2 games, 2 sets of rules. So that's how you got to think of this. You got a game, tell them what it is. Paul, what do you want to say about your how-tos?
You're muted, Paul.
Sorry about that. You know, I think how to is really, you know, you have to engage people, and you as a leader, you have to show that it matters to you, and that you have to be consistent in how you treat everybody within the organization, and that's whether it's accountability, engagement, and try and give everybody a little bit of face time and understand what their challenges are.
Anybody else have any how-to tips that they want to share? These are the things, how we're implementing our culture, and it seems to be working pretty good, and I'd like to share it with you. Any other tips? Because, again, you now got a basic idea of culture. What is culture, at least for this conversation? Vision, goals, mission, and values. Now, you can change it or modify it, but at least gives us a point, Jonathan, where we're talking about the same thing, okay? Then you got the why. You know, this is why we're going to do it, and you got to get the whys in your gut. Now you're going to figure out, how am I going to implement this? Okay?
John?
You know the what and the why without the how. Steve?
A few tips and tricks, and they're pretty simple. Number one, great leaders and great culture have empathy. That's number one. Number two, as a leader, 2 things can be unbelievably empowering from a leadership and a culture standpoint. The first is saying, I'm sorry, and meaning it. If you make a mistake, own it. Let everybody know. And then if you do make a mistake and you own it, then you got to follow that up with, okay, what am I going to do about it? And the other thing that's unbelievably empowering for an organization is the simple thank you.
Now, we do research on this for people all over the world. Darlene does this. And if you were talking to security, fear-based, sometimes with the security, the bread and butter of most companies, and you were with people like some of my people from Japan and people from all over the world, and you're talking to S's, what Steve just said, you have unbelievable power, the word please and thank you. You want to empower security-oriented people. Think of it when you see a waitress or a waiter or a busboy, you know, and you show respect. This please and thank you is very powerful. And type A's or D's on the disc sometimes forget that. It's not their intention. They're not trying to be boss people around. It's just they didn't know the language. Eric, what else you want to say?
I've had, John, and to that point, I've had people, employees of mine, when I've said thank you, they're shocked. They're like, I worked at, this other company for 8 years. No one ever said thank you to me.
Yeah.
And I think when I can deliver my gratitude to my team members, I think they really appreciate that. It's something that
Right.
we all like to hear, whether we're doing whatever even if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. When someone says, thank you, I appreciate what you're doing, it goes a long way.
Right. If you have security-oriented people working for you, the quiet, steady workers, and you have the talkers, the pleasers, they're at high. These are high empathy people. They pick stuff up. Very important. Greg, what else you want to say about implementation that you've seen? You've seen thousands of different companies. Any of the main tip? If you're saying, hey, here's the tip that I really pulled out of all these meetings, is if I had to pick one or two tips, this would be it.
Well, I think Steve touched on something earlier that I think confounds a lot of leaders, and that is when you have someone that isn't fitting into your culture, how quickly do you eliminate that cancer or that deadwood in your culture? Where it gets particularly tough is if that person is productive. If they're not productive, that's an easy one. Like John says, 1, 2s, and 3s. Okay, 4, 5s, and 6s, and the 7, 8, 9, 10s. Well, 1, 2, 3s are easy. They shouldn't have been there anyway. 4, 5s, and 6s get a little tougher. But what happens when you have an 8 or a 9, and now they're not playing, nice in the sandbox? Well, that's where the leader has to step up and really kind of take charge of that, because the longer that leader allows that to fester, the more damage it does on the culture. And that wears on everybody, because now there's a dual standard. And, since we're all from Chicago, a great example is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was the league leader in scoring, but he wasn't winning championships. And Phil Jackson comes along and says, hey, do you want to score a lot of points, or do you want to win championships?
Yeah, right.
Michael said, I want to win championships.
Yeah, right.
So Michael changed. Michael, the greatest basketball player of all time, became more of a team player.
Right.
So, those are the kind of things that make it really hard to be a leader a lot of times, to, call out somebody that's really productive. I think a lot of times you find, I'll say 3 different kinds of people in an organization. And John, you might have a little bit more detail on this, but I think one is you always have critics. You want to try something new, something's going different. You're going to have a group of people that are critical. Secondly, you have the bystanders, people that barely know what's happening. And then thirdly, I think you have the advocates, the people who are going to support the company in this new direction. And so I think to deal with the critics, you have to give them the why. Why are we doing this? Because that disarms them.
Right.
This is clearly a better path. We want to go on this path, and here's why. Boom, boom, boom. That starts to help diffuse their criticism. With the bystanders, I think you want to educate them. You have to give them a lot of reasons and tell them what's happening and how they play a role in that. And then for the advocates, I think you just want to give them more of the, the reasons to come along. They're already coming along. You just have to enhance that more. Like in the Michael
Right.
Jordan example, you want to win championships? Well, then here's what you have to do.
Right.
Boom, he does it, and they win a lot of championships.
Todd Stukenberg was an expert at implementing culture. Todd, tell the people what you did in the D version, like annually and then quarterly and then your monthly. Can you share that?
Yeah, well, let me also say this. I think one of the things that we've said in some ways, but maybe hasn't come out as loud and clear, is that I believe in order to have culture be effective, you have to think values first. There's a lot of mission, vision, values, vision, mission, values. I think that's kind of reversed, and the values have to be first. They have to be uncompromising, and everyone in the leadership role has to model that. And then that ties into, I think, what you're asking, and that is, how do we represent that regularly? How do we reinforce it? The modeling is the biggest piece because people see. They don't just listen, they see. And if leadership folks, really anyone who's in a visible role is not modeling the values, then the culture will fall apart. Then the second piece, what we would do is we would always have some kind of a quarterly discussion that included a discussion of values, even though it maybe seemed like it was being said ad nauseum. It would be brought up, and it would be brought up in a context of what was relevant to the business at that time. So there might be something happening in the business that's tactical or strategic, but it's always relatable back to the values. And so we would pull that in, and then we would recognize those folks across the organization that were representing the values in some way, that did something that reflected the values, and acknowledge it, because like even Bill said, just a simple thank you. It's all about acknowledgement. Everyone strives and drives for acknowledgement, and so bringing that into the context was really important. And then it was just something that was done all the time. We would have regular communication. Anytime you want to foster and drive a culture, the most important vehicle for doing that is communication on a regular basis, so that people can expect it and get consistency and have it be two-way, so that they had an opportunity, whether it was through surveys, whether it was through discussion groups, whether it was just a Q&A in a regularly scheduled kind of a meeting. People had the ability to discuss these kind of topics, not just, hey, we need a new water cooler here, or what. That's great and wonderful, but let people talk about some of the questions and concerns they might have relative to cultural items.
And one of the things Todd did, as good as anybody I've ever worked with in all my businesses, is he would have this review all the time and didn't sugarcoat it. These are the good news. Here's the problems, concerns we're facing. Here's what we need to do. And here's what we're going. So there was what I call the 365 wheel of continuous improvement, always going.
So, John, let me speak on that, because that's a really important point that you just brought up. Let me just touch on it. Culture isn't easy, and culture isn't always pretty. That's what the poster on the wall is. That's what sometimes, and I hate to say this, but sometimes the HR group makes it. Culture is real. And that means that you got to let people have the full story. You got to be completely candid and open with what's going on. That's what is some of the real foundational aspects, the fuel that makes a strong culture.
Now, I'm going to give you 3 steps. I'm going to email this to you, so don't be worried if you don't get it down. Step 1 is you got to define your culture. Start with a culture survey and interviews, and you got to get the culture. It's already there. You got to get it down in writing. Step 1. Step 2, then your game plan. The game plan is like what we just talked to Phil Jackson. It's a document. Too bad my architect client isn't here. He redesigned it. It's a beautiful document, and he gives it to people. When they're interviewing, he gives them, if I'm interested in you, Bill, and you're interested in me, I give you, do you want to play? This is the game. This is a game of football. This is how we play. Do you want to play? This is a game of golf. It's a document, and it's a very living document. And then the third thing is you use this in finding people, focusing and supporting, and like some of the tips you brought up, you want to use more acknowledgement. People already know what they're not. Spend the time acknowledging that which supports the culture. So when Greg's being the vision, say, that's great, you did a great job, you support the vision. Bill, the value of responsiveness, you're phenomenal. And I'm not just saying this, but you're phenomenal at responsiveness. So you're really, really good. So you acknowledge it. And you don't have, you can acknowledge what we're lacking too. You can tell everybody it's COVID, it's stressed out. What's stressing you out? I've had sessions, I've had meetings with companies about nothing. They call me in, we have a meeting about nothing. And a lot of times we're discussing stress issues. Employees love that because they get to talk about what they want to talk about. We will send that to you. So now I want to sort it back to you and now what? So now the question is on the form that said, in my role as blank, I need to. So just share your takeaways from today, but what you need to do. So as a result of our, let's start with you, Todd. As a result of our conversation today, I need to, what comes up for you?
I need to kind of reestablish how I'm going to apply some of these things that I've learned in whatever my next path is. And that's an important thing for me.
Right. And if you're in, one other person mentions in transition, I don't know if he's still with us. I think that was Eric. Get your individual culture defined in writing. If you have questions on that, call me. Paul, what's your takeaways from today and what do you need to do? You still there, Paul?
Oh, you're on mute, Paul.
You're invisible and on mute. You want me to come back to you? Bill, what's your takeaways from today?
So I think that, Steve, your point about getting rid of the bad apple, I've been terrible about that in the past. And I remember once I did let go of someone, even though it was months and months too late. It was a huge weight lifted off the shoulder. I had team members coming up to me and saying, thank you for doing that, And so what I think the biggest takeaway for me, I think that I need to be in more direct one-on-one communication with my team members. I mean, we have a Monday morning meeting. We talk with everybody. We're all there. But I think, from my point earlier about how the best way to implement is doing it yourself. I mean, coming from the leader, bringing it to your people. And the best way that I think I can do that is by carving out more time to have one-on-one interactions with my team members, because just by doing the things that I promote and by practicing what I preach, I think that will be a good way to help permeate the culture that I want throughout our organization.
And the tip I would offer, Bill, call Cyrus about his game plan and what they're doing on 90/90s, every 90 days, and where the employees initiate the review because he's busy, like you're busy, and you're not Mr. Manager. That's, hey, let's sit down and do our quarterly. But I would say you're going to save a lot of money by doing quarterlies with people. Now, you have to break that down a little bit. And I'm not talking salary reviews, just a conversation about what's working.
Right.
Jonathan, what's your takeaways from today?
I think that even though we've had a mission statement and values in place and in writing for a long time, it's not something we've really put in front of people in a while. And so we all talk about what our values and culture are, and I think everyone knows what they are. But I think we need to be more relentless in terms of implementing it, and probably have a meeting with everyone and emphasize it during our quarterly reviews to have everyone, really state that they buy in, that they're committed to it. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head right now, but even, have something, something simple in terms of what our values and culture is, and to actually have everyone sign it. That they're committed to it and that they agree to it. But before doing that, have a discussion about it and make sure that, people agree. So we're not just, management isn't just telling people what it is and they better toe the line.
I want to piggyback on that. That's exactly what I have clients do. Everybody put their signature on it, and all your stakeholders. It could be your outside leadership team, your inside. Anybody associated that's a stakeholder needs to understand the way you play that game.
Right.
If you don't tell them, they don't know. They're coming from football and you're playing golf. Christopher, Paul, are you still there? Okay, we'll go back. Christopher, what's your takeaways from today?
I agree with what Bill said. I think getting down to that lowest level and talking to the people on an individual basis more frequently. I think making sure that they're aware that it needs to be an open conversation. I think a lot of times the lower level employee sometimes thinks management's out to get them or looking for a gotcha moment or something,
Yeah.
they did something wrong, and they're afraid to speak truthfully because they think it'll get them in trouble.
Right.
And
Which deals with your values again. If you have these values, it's okay to strike out. A good at bat, you strike out. Or think of this: you all have, a lot of you, maybe if you have kids, when a child's is falling down, what do you say to them? Learning to walk. What do you say to the kids when they're learning to walk?
You get back up and try again.
Yeah, you don't say, "Hey, you dummy, we want walkers here." You encourage. So we're all learning how to walk. Think of it like that. We're all learning how to walk. When you swim, you swallow water. You strike out. You hit. You strike out to hit. So it's okay. You know, in showing a little compassion. Kim, anything your takeaways from today, or anything you want to say before we move on to Steve?
Sorry, John, were you speaking to me?
Yeah, I just said anything you want to say before we move on to Steve about today.
Oh, yeah, thank you for asking. I think this has all been very interesting. I will admit I had a little bit different idea of how the conversation was going to go. I think in terms of culture, I was thinking things like, do we have a pool table? Are we a company that shouts across the room to one another or not? You know, the more the behaviors of the people versus the kind of a more global approach about how the company feels about different topics and things. So yeah, it was very interesting, and I was glad to be included. Thank you.
And Bill and I have a new title for it. We're going to call you Boss Kim, and we're going to tell Greg from now on, Greg, you do what Boss Kim tells you to do. That's simple. Whatever she tells you to do, just say yes, ma'am. Okay, Steve.
We're working on the pool table.
Wow. So Kim's point about behavior, I think it is part of culture. And if we weren't talking about it, we probably should have been, but it's how everybody interacts with one another. That's a part of that. But as far as good takeaways, and John, you mentioned acknowledgement, and Bill was talking about meeting a little bit more in private, and other people were throughout the year. I think the private part is fine. And to me, that's more the mentoring and the coaching piece. But when you get to acknowledging, I think you need to acknowledge in public, not so much in private, because in public compounds it by orders of magnitude. Because not only are you setting somebody up on a pedestal for all of their peers to see, but you're also telling the other peers what it is that is empowering and enlightening and what was attractive to you about what that individual did. And that's a learning moment, not just for that individual, but for everybody in the organization. So I would say as often as you can acknowledge in public, because you get way bigger bang for your buck than acknowledging in private. And the other thing is when people do great things, acknowledge it right away. Don't wait 3 months for the review. Acknowledge it right away, because it reinforces the behavior that you're trying to establish in the culture.
And,
I agree with that, Steve. I think the sooner you see something and you can acknowledge it or recognize it, the better. And if you can do it in public, it's even better, because you're right, you get a multiplier effect on that. I think that's a huge aspect of culture and leadership. And really, as you said, it doesn't cost you anything, and yet it has a huge impact on the organization, the morale, everything. And I think, as a couple of people have said, they want to get people into a room to do it, make it a big event. Yes, you can do that, but I think the one-on-one coming from the leader is huge. People just love that individual attention. And you can't replace that. It's like a child with their parent, when they spend time with, when a child gets a chance to spend an afternoon with their mother or father, that's a huge effect on the kids. So same thing here.
And for Paul's ROI, reviewing, people will know if you're doing reviews and you're doing acknowledgement, to just stay on the acknowledgement button right now must be important because they're reviewing it. It actually gives you an ROI. It's a measurement. It's not an ROI that you can measure in an ROI, but it's actually a review, and it tells people, must be important because they're doing it all the time, and people get on the bandwagon. So I want to finish up by thanking everybody. I want to give a thank to our host, Greg Verablik, as I said, runs the President's Forum. They're the unique thing about the President's Forum. There's a lot of presidents groups. The unique thing about Greg and the President's Forum, they go one company at a time and they dig down. And Greg won't tell you that, but they've done tons of work in M&A. When I have clients that need money, I have two people I call, and Greg's one of them. So they do a lot of work and, deep work in companies. So that's that. And Bill is one of the top. There's two top connected people in Chicago, and Bill's one of them. And Bill is a highly skilled. He understands the power of the right space to be the right culture. He understands that, and he is very generous with introductions. So if you want to learn the power of introductions in giving, spend some time with Bill Himmelstein. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. Bill and Greg, is there anything else you want to say before we close out? You can stay if you want to do some further conversation or networking, but officially it's 11:29, so we got a minute. So anything Bill or Greg?
I have a question. I had a question I'd like to hear Bill's perspective on. With all the people now working remotely, how is that going to change commercial real estate? It seems to me that companies are finding out that being able to operate remotely greatly reduces and changes their space needs. And so are people going to be, not renewing their leases the same, or asking for a different kind of space, or, hot bunking their desks, or what, from your perspective? What do you see happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I ask people usually is, first of all, do you think that we will be forever living in a global pandemic? Most people answer no, in some way, shape, or form. Eventually we'll get a vaccine, and we won't have this fear of catching a deadly flu type of thing from people who are close to us. In terms of working remotely, most of the research that's coming out right now is showing that it is not as productive. You can conduct a business, you can continue to move forward, but it's very difficult to attract and more specifically retain your top talent in a remote environment. What we're seeing is that in the last 20 years, the average square feet per person in office space, so in downtown Chicago, so the density went from 470 square feet per person 20 years ago to 190 square feet per person pre-COVID. I believe that trend is going to reverse, so there's going to be more square feet per person. I think there's going to be the trend of jamming everybody into an open space. There's a lot of research coming back that's saying that that's not that productive. That doesn't help collaboration. What you need is for people to have areas in your space to be able to collaborate, and then areas within your space to actually get that work done, and people to focus and concentrate. So in terms of how is this going to affect office space in the long run, I don't think it's going to change that much in terms of more people working from home. I think there will be flexible work from home schedules, like maybe once a week you can do that or whatnot. But what I ask people is, why did you have office space before the pandemic? Why did you have it? And most of the response is, so we could build a culture, so we could have teamwork, collaboration, and that reason hasn't changed. On a Zoom call, as we've seen today, I mean, it's very difficult to build that culture, to have that collaboration, to allow people to feel like they're a part of something greater than themselves on a Zoom. And the research is showing through executives of big companies. I mean, yes, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they're saying you can work from home indefinitely. I think they're going to reverse course on that in some time. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, but I think that once it's safe to be back in the office, the majority of companies will do so. Out of about 250 companies I've spoken with since the beginning of COVID, 2 have said they're never coming back to the office. 1 already had their foot out the door and was kind of against office space as it was. And the other is saying, we're productive as it is, but I'm going to circle back with those people in about a year to say, how's your attraction and retention of top talent been since you've been 100% remote? So, I mean, there's a lot more moving parts. I could talk about it for a long time, but for the most part, I think that the trend is going to reverse to more square feet per person. I think companies will have a flexible work from home schedule on, say, 1 day a week or so. But at the end of the day, there's a reason why people have a central gathering spot. And I believe that reason will continue in the future.
Kim, would you be kind enough to send an email out to all the participants today so we're connected in case there's something that Greg said you want to talk to him, or Bill said something you want to talk to him. And then what I will do for Bill and Greg, they know this, is I will send the email out to the group within a week with these steps I talked about and some resources like a form to use for reviews. And Greg mentioned there's a blog we did on opportunity versus have-to thinkers. I think it'd be very useful. So if you want to stay longer, you can. We don't want to be disrespectful to your time. But that concludes the event for today. So we appreciate you being here. If you want to chat more, we can. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you.
John,
Thanks,
putting this
John.
together.
Thanks.
I can stick for 15 minutes or so.
Okay, what do you want to talk about?
What do I want to talk about?
Yeah.
Oh, just a continuation of this great conversation.
Yeah.
So in Bill's world, and he obviously knows more about clients and tenants and whatever, my sense about the use of office space, Greg, is that, and this is what I'm hearing, first of all, remote didn't start with COVID.
Right.
It was happening before. Some types of employees, whether it's millennials or whatever, craved the work from home, whether it was 1 day or 2 day. I don't know if it's going to go to 1 day or 4 days or 3 days. I think what COVID did was it accelerated what was happening before, and it's disrupting a lot of stuff from a business and an office space perspective. And we'll find out what the answer is, 2 and 3 years down the road. My guess is you may have the outliers who are going 100% remote. You may have outliers that are coming back 100% in the office. But my guess is it's going to be some kind of hybrid, and companies are going to figure that out. The times for people to get together and the need for people to get together are the culture and the collaboration kind of stuff. The getting the work done stuff can be done remotely, and it can be done on Zoom. But when you really want to create culture and teamwork and mentoring and those kinds of things, you're never going to get better than face-to-face.
I totally agree. Face-to-face, there will be no substitute for face-to-face. Bill, I'd be interested in some of the research you've seen on the productivity of remote workforces. I do know that, was it Melissa Meyer who ran, was it Yahoo? They all went remote, and then after, I don't know, a period of time, she said, yeah, this isn't working so well. Let's pull everybody back in. And that was a few years ago, Steve. So to your point, absolutely, remote working has been around for some time. The technology, Slack and Zoom and GoToMeeting and what have you, facilitates it now, makes it, way easier, of course, and reliable. So that helps. So it makes it easier for all of us to go do. But, many of us were already doing different aspects of it. We have sales forces that are around the country. They've been working remotely, forever.
Well, and Greg, one of the things that you and Bill can talk about, because as I mentioned, Greg does this monthly meeting and he has speakers. I've been telling Bill, I'd like to hear more, his insights on the do's and don'ts with commercial real estate, do's and don'ts, things you should be actually thinking about doing right now, and he's figuring out. And here's what the research says about the future. That would be an interesting. I'd be interested in hearing that, and I'm sure Greg's members would be interested in hearing that. And that's your expertise, and it's again a little presentation, and then an interview. It's a roundtable, same like we do here.
Yeah,
But
that's
there may
why,
be-
that's why I'd be interested in seeing that research, Bill.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Give them that, and so anything else you guys want to
My
talk?
anecdotal information, from my perspective, just anecdotally, is that I would say it's probably about 75% as effective or productive as in person. But that's
And that's-
just kind of,
That's a significant drop off in productivity.
yeah. Like I said, some jobs I think are more conducive to that. For example, if you're in a manufacturing environment, obviously you can't run a machine from home, or at least most machines. But however, if you're in sales, you can virtually do all of your job from home. So, it varies across the type of position.
Well, and the pandemic has really impacted people working remotely, especially if they've got family and they've got kids and whatever, which, severely has impacted productivity if you've got to worry about your kids getting schoolwork done and schedules and all kinds of things like that. But what I'm hearing anecdotally is people are they're working longer hours, but they're fitting in that non-work stuff during the day, and they're replacing their, hour and a half to 2 hours of commuting or going from meeting to meeting time with being a little bit more productive. So they're using their time a little bit more effectively from beginning to end of day, but they're a little bit less productive doing it.
Yeah, what I've heard is along those lines, Steve, is that let's say you have a meeting in the office that goes scheduled for an hour and it only goes 40 minutes. A lot of times that extra 20 minutes gets lost in talking, about the Bears or whatever after the meeting because you've cleared that. Now on Zoom, if it's scheduled to go 60, it only goes 40. You click the button and you got 20 minutes, you can go do something else. So the water cooler talk is greatly diminished. And you're right, I've heard a lot of talk about, hey, I've got the kids, I got to go pick up my kid at 3 o'clock. But then I go back to work at 7 o'clock. So
Right.
You might be
But Greg,
interested.
that water cooler
Greg and
talk.
Steve, the global stats by TTI says right now 66. What we do is profile these companies, their behavioral profiles using DISC, which is a Jungian tool. But 66% of the world are on the security and the people plane, either the quiet, steady eddies or the talkers. And so those are the ones, and Bill could tell you more about that. Those are the ones that this social stuff that's missing right now is huge. They want to be, I just had with Melissa, Bill, Melissa, we were talking to the entire sales team, and I said, how can we support you? When can we all get together?
Yeah.
When can we all get together? So if you have people pleasers and you have people that are security oriented, the security oriented want it safe, but they want to have this interaction. Now, if they're all DCs, anal retentives, if a couple of the people here were Cs, the Cs are not as oriented that way because they don't like asking. That's where I disagree with you, Steve. Research would say the public acknowledgement works with a certain profile, but people that are real security oriented or real private people, they don't like public acknowledgement. Matter of fact, they don't want you to know anything about them. So that's where the private, so you have to customize this.
Well, but even if you're acknowledging in public, I think Steve's point and Greg's point was that other people hear that. And so you get a greater audience to reinforce the preferred behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it tells people it must be important because you're reviewing it. I look at what acknowledgement is a form of reviews.
right.
It's gotta be important. They keep bringing it up.
If it's not getting measured, it's certainly not going to be managed. So
Yeah, and reviews are a form of measurement, but they're not necessarily an ROI, as you said. There's some things do you pay your electric bill? Everybody says yes. Well, you can't see it. Why do you pay? You can't see it. I mean, where's the proof? Put your finger in the socket. You'll find out there's proof.
Yeah, something bad's going to happen if you don't.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so, so it's, or the other one I use, I say, you ever go to church or synagogue? Well, yeah, what's the ROI in that? Huh? What about you send your kids to school? What's the ROI in that?
Very questionable these days.
Absolutely.
Well, it's crazy. There's certain things, it's kind of crazy talk. Anyway, I got to go. Thanks for hosting. Hope you're satisfied with the facilitation, and we'll move forward. And I have an introduction for both of you. I just thought of somebody that's good for both of you, so I'll send it to you.
Thanks, John.
guys. Steve, it was good to see you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Brad.
Steve, nice
everybody.
meeting you. Thanks. Bye-bye.